YouTube, what's going on, man? Listen, I have uploaded a lot of videos, but this one is absolutely special. We're gonna talk about end-to-end testing, Cypress, and at a very beginner level that you can understand easily and then apply on your React projects, Angular projects, Vue projects. It doesn't matter. You can just apply this everywhere on every web application. So watch the video till the end where we go through an entire application and we kind of write end-to-end test cases just like you would implement in a real-world application. Now I have said this before, but I'm gonna say this once again. Like the video and subscribe to the channel because it's free, and just this action done by you can promote this video to thousands of developers for free, and a lot of beginners would get to learn new content from my side. So today we are going to talk about Angular and Cypress, and basically Cypress and how we can test different web applications with Cypress. And the beauty of Cypress is that you can use it with any framework, whether be it React, Angular, Vue.js, or even an application that has no framework at all. So you just need a website that you can test your code at. So essentially it's really easy to use, and one of the reasons that we write E2E tests is sometimes we want to test out complete flows. For instance, a user goes to this page, tries out this button, and then does this action, and then this should be the expected scenario. So as we know, we have two kinds of tests right now, or maybe more even, but there are two main kinds. One is the unit test and the second one is the E2E test or the end-to-end test. Here we are going to talk about end-to-end tests, which are also sometimes called integration tests, in which we have an entire flow and then we expect things to be done after performing a certain action. Why Cypress and why not something else? That is also one of the questions. For instance, Angular comes up with protractor, and by default when you have an Angular application, for instance, this is the code that I'm going to be using right now. So essentially, when you have an Angular application, you do have some config for protractor. For instance, if you go to the E2E folder on a fresh Angular application, you will find protractor.conf.js, and you can basically run E2E tests out of the box with protractor. The reason why we use Cypress is that the API of Cypress is so easy to implement that almost anyone can do it. Even QAs can do it, even business analysts can do it after some efforts and obviously some learning. But essentially, it's really easy to learn. So today what we are going to do is that we are going to try out a simple Angular application. If you want to follow through, you can do it. Right now in the project, we have mainly two branches. One is the main branch, and the other one is, I believe, the start here branch. Yes. So you would want to go to start here if you're watching this video even in the future, because we would have a final branch as well in which we will have the final code, or it might be the case that we have the final code in the main branch, but essentially go to the start here branch. What I've done so far is that I've just cloned this repository. So if you're familiar with Git, obviously what you would do is you would run git clone and this URL, and then it will clone into a folder named ng-cypress starter. Once you are in there, you can open it into your favorite editor. For this video, I'm using Code because I use VS Code all the time. And then you can just cd into it and then run npm install, which will install all the package dependencies for this project. Once you're done with this, we are ready to go. And this is what the code looks like then. So essentially what we want to do as a first step when we are working with Cypress is we need to install Cypress into our project. So if I go to cypress.com and show you this really cool headline, you do it just like this: npm install Cypress. Now, since we have this project or this package Cypress only as a dev dependency and it shouldn't go to production, for instance, where we deploy our code in the end, we can install this as a dev dependency. Before doing so, I just noticed that we are in the main branch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check out the starter branch or start here branch. I'm going to zoom in it a bit so everyone can see this. If you have any questions, make sure to type in the chat and I can follow through. So you will do a git checkout start here, and this should check out the branch for you, and then you'll do a npm install -d and then Cypress. This should install the Cypress package in your local repository or in your machine for this particular project. Once you are done with this, we will have to create kind of a script that we can run for starting Cypress. So let's quickly wait for this to be done. in the meantime, we are going to go into the package.json, and here we have already a lot of scripts like ng, start, build. So we are going to just create a script called start Cypress. And essentially here we'll say Cypress open. This is the command that we will run to just start the Cypress. Now, in order to just run the project, what I need to do is I need to do npm run start or npm start, however you would want to call it. So I would just say npm start. And essentially this command runs ngserve. So let's have a quick look into the application itself while we have the Cypress being downloaded. All right, so this is the application that we have right now. It's a really simple application, but with a couple of cool functionalities. For instance, this is a chat application. So what we have is a seed, or how would we call the initial messages that we get when we open the application. So you can see that we have different images, just ignore this, but we have the same message when we open the application. These are just dummy messages. And then I can just say, let's say hello world. And then this message will be added. I can add more things here. And then all of those things would be added in the chat. What I can do is that I can delete a message from here. For instance, I could press delete here and you can see that it's gone. I can also click an item and go to its detail page. So obviously a good user experience to show a highlighted background and this pointy cursor when an item is clickable. So when you click on this, you go here and you see the message here. And then what I can do is that I can also press delete and go back to the previous page. Now let's delete this perfectly fine message. So if I go back, you can see that the message is gone. Okay. So this is the entire functionality that we have right now. We have two different pages, chat and messages, and then we have this functionality of adding a chat message and deleting a message. Now that we have Cypress installed in our system, we can quickly go here and we can add a new tab in which we'll run the command for start Cypress. We can also do it in the terminal as well, but I'm going to run it here. So npm run start Cypress. This should give you this message if you are installing or if you're running Cypress the first time. And the good thing about Cypress is that you have this browser window that you can see, you can interact with, and you can follow all your tests through it. So the good thing about installing Cypress into any new project is that when you do it, Cypress already creates a bunch of tests for you to work with. And you can easily see those tests and how they work. And then you can start even copy pasting code from there and then kind of following through it. For instance, we have these example tests right now. I can go to this one, actions.spec.js. And if I go here, okay, I need to allow access. Let's do it real quick. This is what you get. So you see, it's a really good UI, and in this UI, we will have our tests loaded the first time, and then we'll have them running one by one, and then we can see what is the outcome of those tests. So we have these tests for type. So what it's doing right now is it goes to this URL, and then it performs a bunch of actions, and then it asserts or checks if a thing is valid or not. You can see that on the left side, we have these tick marks. If there was any test that would have failed, we would get a red light here. Now, one really cool thing about Cypress is that if I open a particular test, I can follow through all the actions performed one by one. So it's sort of a time travel debugger that you can work with. For instance, in this test, you can see that it first did get action email, which kind of got this input, the email, and then it did a typing or on this email called fake@gmail.com. So you can see on the right side, exactly on the input, it is changing the content to before and after. So before it was nothing, and after it wrote fake@gmail.com or email.com. And then it asserted if this was true or not. But I'm not going to go into a lot of details here. Rather, we'll just go ahead with creating our own test for our own application. So I'm going to close this one now, and you can see that there are a lot of tests that we already have right now. So what Cypress did for us is it created this folder. As you can see, it's green. That means we have added this. So we have this folder created, and we have this file created as well, which is cypress.json. And this file is right now an empty file. What we can do is that we can ignore all of the tests in the integration example folder. So this is the examples folder that we have. So what I'm going to do is that I can try do insert snippet and cy Cypress config, and here we have something for us. So what this configuration does, or cypress.json does, is that it tells Cypress what to do and what not to do based on certain variables. For instance, I'm telling Cypress to ignore all of the files in the example folder. So if I go back to my Cypress, you can see that it says no files found, no test found. So it's ignoring all the examples tests. And the next thing that we need to do is provide a base URL. Since we know that our tests would be running at localhost 4200, I could change it to the production URL as well. It depends on what we are trying to test or what URL we are trying to test. So what this helps me in Cypress is that when I write test, I can provide relative URLs rather than writing HTTPS localhost 4200 every time, everywhere. So I can just use, for instance, in the test, I would just use /chat, and then that should be enough. So I'm providing a base URL for this test. Now that we have done this, we need to write our first test. I'm going to create a new file inside the integration folder. So we are going to call this app.spec.js. So the first thing that you need to know about Cypress is that what is a context and then how we write tests. So I'm going to copy paste this really quick because that's so much fun. Let's see. So what we have here is these type references for Cypress. The context is basically the suite or the context that you are testing in. For instance, I'm writing this test for app, so I'm going to write app level test on this context. Now, what I want to do in this test is just visit the /URL, which is the root of our application. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just run one integration spec, click here, and then it will load our test, and then finally it will do what we want to do. It says no test found because we haven't written any test. We have just written a command that you should go and visit a /. So to write a test, we use the it method. And then the convention that we use for writing a test is something like it should do blah, blah, something. So essentially what I want to test right now in our application is this has a title that says ng Cypress starter, and title is something that is bound to an HTML. For instance, you can see installing Cypress documentation. This is something that you see on your browser's tab bar. This text is not related to title. This is a different thing, and this title is a different thing. So what I want to test is what is the value of this title here. So what I can do is I can go and basically start writing this test, and it takes the string as the first argument, which is the description of the text. So I can say it should have the title, the value of which was ng, what was that? Cypress starter. Let's make a mistake here and to see what happens if we make a mistake. And this is really handy in some sort of, or in all sorts of test-driven development. So I'm going to close this a bit so we can see more code. And what we want to do here is that we want to check the value of the title. So we have to use this cy. This is how you start writing tests. And then it has a lot of utility functions, one of which is title. So I can simply say cy.title dot, and then I can say should, and then I can provide this an operator and then the expected value. So the operator that we can use is eq, which means equal to, and this is an assertion that we are trying to work with. So we are saying, hey, the title should be ng Cypress starter. Okay, so we save this, go back to our Cypress, which I can do easily here, and then click here. I think I already have opened them here. Yes, I have. So if I refresh, you see that it visited, and then it is trying to do something, and then it fills with an error. And the test clearly says that expected ng Cypress starter to equal ng Cypress starters with the Z. This equal or the thing after equal is what we were expecting, and this is what the actual value was. Okay, so you can see all of the steps in here, and it also tells what test is failing or which assertion basically is failing, and you can also view the track trace from here as well. But I know where the problem is, so I can just go here and then I can press save, and then this assertion is working fine. So we have our first Cypress test working. Yay! Now to the actual job. This wasn't anything. The next thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we get the initial set of messages right away when we open the application. So to say the seed messages. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a new file here, and then I'm going to call it chat.spec.js. In here, I'm going to do a really quick copy paste. I'm going to change the context to chat. And then before each visit, we need to go to slash, or by default, if you notice the URL, the default URL when we land is redirected to chat, because chat is the main page that we land on, but it doesn't matter. So I'm going to just put it here. Now, inside of this test, what I want to check is to be able to see if we have messages or not. So in order to do so, what I can quickly do is that I can say it should have the initial dummy messages. And the second argument is, as I mentioned, the callback function, which basically defines our test or the logic within the test. And then what I need to do is to be able to check if we have the list available or not. So in order to do so, what I can do is I can first try to see what is the selector of this particular element. So if I go and check the message list, you see that we have, I should bring this to sides to look at better at it. So we have this messages list element, which is basically a div. So it has a class message list. Then we have inside a div, which has a class message item. So what I would want to do is to get all the items. You can quickly try to do it in the console as well, doing a document.query selector all, and inside you can just put this and this. So you see that we got a node list of 4 items. If I hover on of all of them, you can see that they are targeting these. Now, what I want to check is, are there 4 messages on the view when I open this this application? Awesome. So what we need to do is we need to go to the code, and then we will do a cy.get. This get method accepts a selector which is equal to the CSS selector that we use. So in order to do so, I could directly write message item, but I'm a big fan of writing a kind of hierarchical selectors, which makes it more robust. So what I can say is that we have messages list and then messages item. So I can do a dot message list and message item. And once we have this, then we have to check what is the length of these values. So right now, what I can do is that I can say expect something something. For instance, I should do something like, hey, messages to have length 4, something like this. Okay, but the thing is that this doesn't return the list of item. Although what we can do is that we can use a should method here, and inside we can provide a callback function just like this. This callback function essentially gets the div elements or the DOM elements. So I can name this, let's say, messages list. And then here I can expect the messages list to have length 4. Let's make it a 3 to see this failing. So I'm going to go back to my Cypress, exactly to the browser, and then we are going to refresh. So let's see. We went to the home page, and then it's trying to do something, and then it says timed out retrying after 4000 milliseconds. Too many elements found 4 and expected 3. So we wrote in our code to expect 3 items, but actually it should be 4 since we have 4 messages. And this should essentially fix our test. So if you go here, you can see that it tries to get, so it first goes to the URL, and then it goes to the messages, which it finds using the selector, and you can hover over it and check it out. And then it expects things to be working fine, which it does. So you can see how easy it is to work with Cypress to write E2E tests, because you can work with the selectors, and you can also then assert different things based on your business logic. So now that we have written this test, the next thing that we need to do is to make sure, hey, what if I type something and then click this button? Should it actually add the item? So in order to do so, we'll do some more magic. Let's quickly try to write a new test. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to here, and then I'm going to say one question that Zohair is asking, we can only get chats via elements ID or class, or we have more methods to get? Really good question. One of the things is that this cy.get uses a selector. So it's a CSS selector. Now you can use by ID, you can use by classes, you can use by attribute names. It doesn't matter. It depends on you how you want to achieve different things. In the book that I'm writing, I have used a pretty complex query as well, which includes things like how you would find an element that has an attribute that starts with a particular word. So you can also write complex queries for cy.get. Now, jumping on to the next task, which is, or the next test, which is, it should basically add a new message to the list. So it should add a new message to the list. One of the things that I would like you to focus on is the naming of the test, which is really important. Anyone that opens this file should be able to easily understand what this test is about and what it should do. And then obviously you should also be able to understand what you're writing. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to write into the text area. So I'm going to go back to my my app and try to find out what is the selector of this text area. So this is a text area and we need to type into this text area. So in order to do so, you see that in this text area, we do have some classes like CDK text area, blah, 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 the chat input. So we can either get this chat input or we could use something like write box, chat input. It depends on you. So what I'm going to do is that I can simply say cy.get and then I can try providing chat input, for instance. All right. Now, the next thing that we need to do is to type into this, this chat box. So we have a method already that is called type, and inside we can provide the string value that we want to try out with. So we can say hello world, and that should be it. So we get the input, we type a value inside it, and then we see what happens. So I'm going to go back to Cypress, and not Cypress, but here. So we have this, and what we have written so far is that we go to the URL and then we find the chat input and then we type hello world. So notice that how it shows before and after. So before it was nothing and now it is the value. And now we have to press this button. So let's go back to Chrome and try to find out what is the selector of this button. So it's called send button, and inside we have a button. Now this button has button and button primary class, which is what you get from Bootstrap. I would not recommend using these classes because they are Bootstrap classes and you could have many buttons on the screen with these classes. So you have to be specific about the selector that you're working with. So I'm going to go ahead, sorry, I'm going to go ahead and do a cy.get or cy.get, and then I'm going to say send button, and then the button inside. Now, one important or one interesting thing about Cypress is that I do this like cy.get all the time, but I can actually chain all of these methods together just in one go, something like this. And this would still work. So all these methods that we see, they are chainable, which means that I could do something like this, and you will find a lot of examples from other projects that they do this. So what this does is that this means cy.get this guy, and then cy.type in the element, and then cy.get this button, and then do something else. So inside here, we are going to say click, which means that we are going to find this button and then we are going to click on it. And then let's try this. So we have this here, and then what it happens is that it finds chat input, types hello world, then it goes to here, and then it presses click. So once it presses click, you see that the item is already being added into the view. So we have most of the work done for what we wanted to do, and now we just have to check the length of the items. So essentially, before we had only 4 items, and now we have almost 5 items. So we could do something like this and this, and then we could say the length should be, let's say 5. And if we save this, go back to our code, you see everything passes. We have 4 elements in the beginning. We went to chat input, typed, clicked the button, and then we checked out the list, and then the list had 5 items. Super awesome. One of the things I would do when writing this for an actual project would be to kind of make this thing a utility function. So I don't have to repeat this all the time. For instance, I have copied this here and then here and then here. So yeah, it's not like a really good idea to copy things over and over. But for the sake of just learning, I think this is fine. We can go with this. All right. So one more thing that we have done now. The final thing that we need to do is we need to be able to delete a particular item. So for this one, we are going to pick, let's say, any item. Let's say this item. How are you doing? And when we delete or when we press the delete button, we see this going away. Now, one of the things that is really interesting is that this functionality is dependent upon a person hovering on the item, which means that this item might be visible or might not be visible. So first of all, in order to click something, you obviously have to have that on the view so you can perform the click on it. How do we tell Cypress to click on an item that is not there initially? So if I go to my Cypress, you see that there's nothing highlighted at the moment. So one of the things that we can do that is really interesting in Cypress is that we have a couple of ways to do this, which means if something is not visible, make it visible and then click on it. So first of all, I'm gonna type the description of the text. This is should remove a message when the delete button is clicked from the list. And you don't have to worry about how long the description should be. It's up to your choice. But yeah, essentially I like to have it as descriptive as possible. Now I'm gonna just bring it a bit down so I can see more things. All right. Now what I need to do is I need to basically get all the items and then I need to select one item out of them and then I need to be able to click the delete button. So in order to do so, what I can actually do is that I can use this same method which brings all of the items. Now I have to select one of them. Okay. There's something called .eq method which gets a particular item from the list. So I'm going to use this how are you doing, which is at the index 2, since the indexes start from 0. So it's 0, 1, 2. So what I can do is that I can use the eq method here and then I can use 2. And then what I need to do is I need to be able to find this delete button inside this message. So in terms of hierarchy, what we have is that we have a message item. Inside, we have this button. So we need to be able to say to Cypress, hey, find this message item or get this message item and then find this delete button inside the message item. So we are going to go here in the code and then we are going to use a new method which is called find, and then we should be able to provide a delete button here. Now, one of the interesting question is why can't we use this get method? And that would be a really good question. The reason we are not able to use the get method is that every dot something something means cy.get. It doesn't mean what you found earlier dot find or dot get. So if we do a get here, we will end up in finding a lot of delete buttons because this will find all the delete buttons in the view. And if I show it to you, you can see it here. So it found all the messages, got the item at the index 2, and then it did a cy.get delete button. And you can see that on the right side, we have 4 buttons highlighted. So it found all of them. Instead of this, we need to use the find method, and then we should be able to get the right element. So if we use a find, you can see get eq2 and then find, and you see that the right button is highlighted at the moment. What do we have to do now? Really simple. We need to be able to click this. And once we have clicked this, then we have to check initially the elements were 4. Now are the elements 3. So we do this, we go back and then we wait and we see if everything works. All right. So it seems like cy.click failed because the element is not visible. Awesome. This is what we talked about. The element is not visible and we need to be able to click it anyways. One of the things that we could do with this click method is we can provide an object and say force and set it to true. This way, even if an element is not visible, it is still clicked. And now you can see all the tests pass. I'm going to reload it to show you one more time. So it goes there, finds it, clicks the button, and then you can see that the item disappears after it. And then we try to get all the list of items which are 3 in number. And then we assert that the length is 3. Awesome sauce. So one more test written, one less thing to do. All right. Now There's one more thing that we talked about is if I click on a particular item, we should be able to go to the details page of this message. So we should be able to go to this URL and that should be it. Now, just notice the sequence of tests that I'm writing. I'm writing about all of the events that are possible or all of the actions that are possible on this particular page. I'm not talking about, hey, what if I delete this button? I'm not going to put that in the chat test. I'm going to put that in the message test later on. So from this page, I can click on an item and I should be able to go to the URL of that item. So in order to do so, what we can do is that we can say that, hey, we have these 4 items. Let's take, for instance, the 4th item, which has the EQ3 because of the indexes. And then when we go to this page, the URL should be localhost 4200/messages or /message/3. This is what we have to test. And this is how we identify, hey, if I click this, did I actually go to the message detail page? How would you identify? Just like this. Another way would be to just check the message property or compare this message text. But I think the easier way is to just see the URLs. So in order to do so, we'll go into the code and then we should just say that should navigate to the message page on list item click, or I could say message item click. And then we should be able to just write this code. So we do a cy.get. Let's copy paste with pride. So I'm gonna just go here, do this. Instead of 2, I'm gonna press 3. Why? So we get the third or the 4th element basically. So number -1 is the EQ. Now, when we get this, we need to be able to just click this item and that's all. So when we click this, the URL should change and then we should be able to assert that the cy, not cry, the cy.url is a method. So I'm going to use the URL method. And then we do a should, and then since we are comparing, we use the EQ operator again, and then we provide it with a really solid value. So let's test this out. If I go here and then I go home page, and then if I press the 4 button, this is the URL that I get. So I'm going to just copy this, go here and paste this as it is. And now if we save this, go back to our test, try to see what happens, is everything works. So we have the message list, it got the 4th item, it clicked on it, the URL changed from before to after, okay? And then the URL changed and we saw the message and then we asserted that the URL is what we expected. And now we have a test. Now, the good thing is that if any of these functionalities fail for any reason, for any bad code, for any weird release, we should be able to just see that right out of the box. Now, we are going to write the final test for this one. And in order to do so, we'll just create a new file. And this is going to be our last test suite. So I'm going to go here in Cypress and then I'm going to say, hey, just create, no, not the Cypress, but in the integration folder, message.spec.js. And here, I'm going to quickly go to here, copy, call it message. And then what we do is that in this particular case, we should be able to actually use the URL. So what I'm going to use is instead of using slash, I'm going to try this one out. Okay. So /message/3, which is the URL for a different thing. I've got a question. Can we place the values dynamic, like length of chat, element, index, message, user ID? Yes, we can do that as well. What you would do in that particular case is that you should have a way to tell Cypress what is the ID that needs to be clicked. So in order to do so, you would potentially go here and add an attribute to each of this div. Let's say an attribute that defines its ID. And then in the test, you first get the ID, then you click, and then you kind of identify that, hey, the URL is this one. What is the ID after this URL? And then you can then check the user ID. So you would have to do some efforts in keeping it dynamic. I hope that answers the question. If not, do let me know. All right. So back to messages. So we are going to this particular URL. That's good. And now we need to be able to see if we can delete a particular message. For instance, what would happen is that we will go to this page and then we'll click delete. And then what happens is that it goes back to the previous URL. So the URL changes. That is the first assertion. And then the second assertion is that the items should have reduced from 4 to 3. So let's write this code now. In order to do so, we need to know what is the selector of this button. So it is again button danger, not a really good class to work with. I would rather go and do a card body and then button danger, just to make sure that I don't mess anything up in the entire page. So in order to do so, we'll just go here and then first let's write a good description, of course. Should delete the message and go back to the previous URL, or go back to home page, I would say. Home page. And first thing first, we need to get the delete button. So we'll do a cy.get, and then here we say, hey, card body delete, oh, not button danger. Oh, I also remembered one really cool thing, and that is we can also say get a particular element by its text, which is really easy. So I can actually say get the delete button from the page. In order to do so, what I could do is I can get the card. Let's say just get the card, and then I could say contains, and then I can provide the text value, which is delete. When I do this, I should be able to actually get the delete button. So in messages, and also one more thing to tell is that it's running all the specs, but I can actually go and run a particular spec. For instance, you click here to run all the specs, but if I just want to run message specs, then I would just click message, and then it would run only the message specs. Now you can see that it goes to message 3, and then it gets the card, and then it contains delete. So it actually gets the button just by its text. So this is a really handy tool. Anyways, we got the delete button. Then what we need to do is, of course, doing a click. Once we do this, we can then assert the cy.url. Then we say it should equal, and then it should be the home page. So the home page is essentially not HTTP localhost 4200. Why not? Because when we delete, we go back to the home page, which is the /chat page. So we need to assert this and not root. So we are going to just paste it here. And then finally, we need to check the messages list that they should have reduced. So if I see here the tests are passing, you can see that when we click the delete button, then the new URL changes, and the URL then becomes chat, and you see that the message is gone, of course. So the final test would be exactly the same. I'm going to go here, copy the code, come back here, paste it right away, and then I would expect the length to have reduced to 3. Now I save this, and if I go back to Cypress, you see that all the tests are passing. We have get, click, then URL changes, then we assert, then we get the messages list, and then we assert the items length to be 3. And that is it. Now I could be a noob, and I could just write all of these tests under one file with all the flow, or even in one test. Why not? But that's a really bad idea, and each test should be absolutely isolated from each other, and we should have a context of each test so we know which tests are failing. And this time travel debug is something really awesome, because anyone can identify where things are going wrong. For instance, if I change the text of this delete button to say delete message, so I'm going to go to the message, and I'm going to just say delete message. And as soon as I do it, I go back here, I try it out. So it tries to find the delete with delete. Oh, awesome. So it's using a regex. Although if I had changed this to something else, maybe called remove, then obviously this would fail. And one really interesting thing is that you would know something is failing if it takes a lot of time. Otherwise, it's super fast. You see it kind of waits for 4,000 milliseconds, like 4 seconds, and tries to do the same thing again. So you can see the delete wasn't found. We found the card, but this is what we failed with, and it also gives you the line number where it failed. So it couldn't find anything with delete, and now we have to update our test as well. So I'm gonna put this back here, and now we are as good as new. And that's pretty much it for the session. Now I can look at the questions. How we can tell the order of spec files to be executed? The order of the spec files do not matter because we should not write them in a way that they should be executed in a sequence. So every test that we write should be absolutely isolated. By that I mean every context should be completely isolated, which means that the app context should not be dependent upon chat. Similarly, even within one context, all of the tests should be completely isolated. And they essentially are isolated. For instance, you see that we run these tests like for the chat, right? So if I go back to the tests, can I go from here? Yes, I can. So even for the tests for chat, you see that we run initial dummy messages, then we add a message, which essentially in the end becomes 5 messages. But then when the next test starts, you see that we go and visit the page again. So each of the tests is essentially not linked to anything else. For each test, we navigate to the page. So it starts from the beginning, then we get some data, and then we perform some actions. If you want to do something in sequence, you have to write that in a single test to be able to execute all of the things at once. But it's quite a rare case, but it's possible that you have a case to work with. Can Cypress test network calls as well? Yes, really good question. Cypress can intercept network calls, and you can actually mock the network calls as well if you don't want to have your application hitting your server time and again, or in fact to get data, for instance. You can definitely mock data with Cypress. This is some of the things that I have planned to write in my book as well. So stay tuned for that, or you can Google and you will find certain information on that as well. But yes, Cypress can test network calls and intercept network. It can test network calls as well. It can also intercept network calls. Now, it depends on what you mean by testing network calls. Do you mean that you do a network call and check what data came back? Because that is potentially not the use case for E2E tests for web application. That is more of a use case for backend end-to-end tests. So if you're talking about checking the network call data, then that's not something that Cypress is perhaps more suitable for. Although the E2E test that you would write would be, hey, I do a network call, I get back data, then what do I show on the UI? Do I have something changed? For instance, I did a login and submitted a form, then there should be a network call gone to the server. Something should have come back. And do we show a toast of success? If we show a toast of success, that means that the network call was successful, right? Or it could be your mock call, but then essentially we are interested in what happens in the UI for the user. So Cypress is most suitable for that kind of use cases. It's your front-end end-to-end testing tool. I really hope that you liked the video. If you did, press the thumbs up button and also subscribe to the channel so this content can reach thousands of developers, as I said before as well. Happy coding, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and I'm gonna see you in the next video.